Let's share my screen in the right order. All right, is that finally coming through okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, everybody. And I'll let others trickle in as I start signing on here. We're so excited to have you all join us. Today, we're having a community conversation focused on data science resources and our partnerships with scientific communities. We have an awesome lineup of panelists as well as speakers, and I'm just really excited to have you all here today. So if it's the first time that you're joining us, just a quick recap of the National Microbiome Data Collaborative. So the NMDC is a pilot program funded by the Department of Energy. It's currently a collaborative project run at 4 national labs. And our mission is to build a gateway that provides access to multi-omic microbiome data, essentially making that data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. As many of you may know, multi-omic data is currently spread across a lot of different primary repositories. That data is not necessarily standardized, nor is it processed in the same way. So the NMDC is working on making that more accessible by promoting data standards as well as bioinformatic workflows. Of course, promoting the use of that requires partnerships with research communities. And that's really why we're talking about the topic today. Engagement is a strategic priority of the NMDC. While we're building data infrastructure and computational resources, partnering with our research community is a huge priority, and we have several different activities and programs that we're doing in order to encourage that. So one of the ways in which we are partnering directly with the research community is through our Champions program. Champions understand the value of well-curated data, and they also advocate for fair microbiome data. They're also some of the first in line to give us feedback on a lot of our programs, usability, and our workflows. You see their lovely faces here, and some of you are joining us today. So, and you could find out more about them at the URL at the bottom. And one of our more engaged programs is the NMDC Ambassadors Program. These are early career researchers across broad disciplines who've partnered with the NMDC and to receive support and training so that they can go back to their own research communities to also do some training focused on data standards and to encourage adoption of these standards. You can also learn more about them from the URL at the bottom. So, this topic here today is really important because it lifts the hood a little bit on these two programs that, we think are really important to what the NMDC is doing. We hope that you'll be inspired and encouraged to engage in becoming a champion for your respective communities and programs that are relevant for your work. And just wanted to kind of share a little bit about who's here today based on the job titles that were submitted. We did have quite a few folks who are in the research domain, but we also have others who are working in community management, as well as directors and managers. So welcome everybody, so glad to have you here. So for today, I'm really excited to introduce our panelists and speakers. We have Alycia Crall, who's the Director of Community at the Carpentries, Zoe Lianza, who's the Communications Manager from Sage Bionetworks, Claire Sturm, who's the Deputy Director of the Incubator at the Science Gateways Community Institute, and of course, our co-host Lou Woodley, who's the Director of the Center for Scientific Collaboration and Community Engagement. So with that, I'm going to actually pass it on over to Lou to give us a little bit of framing and context for what we'll be talking about today. So 1 second to stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Pajau, and also to Marissa for organizing today. So let me bring up my slides. So I'm really the warm-up act, and I'm going to set a little bit of context and share a couple of frameworks that are going to then help us to look at some examples of specific data science communities that the other speakers are going to present today. And then we're looking forward to having a discussion with you about those communities and about the frameworks. So really the question that we have in mind here and what I'm going to introduce is, how might we describe member engagement within data science communities? So we know that community work has gained prominence in recent years. We talk a lot about how communities can kind of be useful for culture change efforts and for thinking about things from metadata standards through to fair data and research data management and so on. But when I say community and you say community and someone else says community, are we really talking about the same thing? How can we meaningfully compare perhaps apples with oranges with pears? And so the framework that I'm going to present today is going to help with that. So first of all, though, a little bit about the centre that I run. So CSCCE is all about scientific community building. So we're a research and training centre that supports community managers. And whatever your job title, if you are the human infrastructure, the person that is convening and nurturing and managing a scientific community, then we're here to support you. And we do that by providing training and resources to enable you to be successful in your roles. And to date, there hasn't been much professional development training available for folks in these roles. And so that's really why we exist. And so we provide support in a number of different ways. So we do this by developing and publishing resources, including core frameworks, guidebooks, and tip sheets. So we're going to look at 2 of those guidebooks today. And the links to those are in the virtual notes docs as well. So if you haven't yet seen those, they're freely available to download from our Zenodo repository. We also provide professional development opportunities in a range of different formats. So we do online training courses, we do shorter form webinars, community calls, and then we also work with clients on fee-for-service consultancy. So basically, whatever you need in terms of support with community building, we're here to help. We also convene community managers in a community of practice. So, we support community building and we do community building too. So we now have over 350 community managers from around the globe who are really coming together via a series of programming and spontaneous activities to provide peer support and a learning space together. And then finally, because we want all this to be evidence-based, we carry out a small amount of focused research to help do some language setting, some kind of development of shared frameworks about how we talk about this role of the community builder in STEM, and specifically how we talk about STEM communities. And so I'm going to point out some of those resources as we go through today. So if you haven't yet seen our resources, all of these are freely available to download. So today we're going to be exploring the community participation model. There's actually 2 sections of our guidebook with a 3rd section to come by the end of the year. That's all linked in the virtual notes. We've also created scientific community profiles to describe different scientific communities. So if you're looking for inspiration about what other STEM communities have done, what kind of staffing they have, what kind of programming they provide, these profiles can be a good starting point to get some information and make some comparisons. And then finally, we provide resources around adjacent community building activities. So things like hosting virtual events. Okay, so all that said, how do we describe what happens in our scientific communities? And how can we meaningfully compare, whether the activities and the programming that we're providing is actually really helping us to achieve the goals that we actually have for the community when we launch it? So this is why we developed the CSCCE community participation model. This is a framework that describes member engagement within communities through 5 different modes of member engagement. And so what we see on the diagram here is that we've got these 4 modes that happen within the community. So moving from convey, consume on the left through to co-create on the right. And then we've got this meta mode, the champion mode, which is where emergent leaders from within the community, sometimes perhaps folks that you think of as super users, kind of step up and they want to take on roles that can contribute to the maintenance, the growth, and the evolution of the community. So what I'm going to do today is outline this framework for you, and then talk a little bit more about this champion mode, so how you can work with those emergent leaders to really advance the mission of your community. So what we see here on this framework is that essentially we have information flow that moves from a transmissive mode. So in convey, consume, the community manager or the host organization is pushing out information. So we might imagine this as being a weekly or a monthly newsletter or blog posts letting folks know about updates about things that have happened in the community. So that's really all about transmission, pushing information out. Then when we move across, we enter this transactional mode. So where we understand what the terms of engagement are, how members relate to one another and relate to the host of the community. And so that might look like inviting members to contribute to things. So contribute to a survey, come and post an answer to a prompt or a question in an online discussion forum. Or that could even get through to collaborating, where there's a kind of scaffolded set of interactions where members are starting to actually interact with one another, but the community manager is probably doing a lot of the coordination of that. But the real magic, the potential of communities gets unleashed when we get into the transformational mode of information sharing. So when we co-create together. And you'll see here intentionally that the convener, whether that's the community manager or the host organization, has now shrunk down to a kind of equal size with the community members. So we can think about like we're all sitting around the table together and we're all figuring out the path towards the goals that we want to do. So hopefully we've all experienced what that feels like to be in this really fertile, rich environment where everybody's able to suggest ideas and we iterate together and we come up with something new that we didn't know how to do at the beginning of the conversation. And so just one final thing that I want to say about this model is that we try not to imply any kind of value judgment here. So for some communities, staying in this transmissive mode of information sharing, so convey, consume, pushing out information, that's enough. There's perhaps only enough interest for the organization to continue to raise awareness about a particular topic and share information about it. And maybe the goal at that particular stage of its life cycle or of its funding is not to get all the way over to co-create. So don't feel that you've got to think about how to move, every single member over to the far right. The really important thing here is that you identify what the goals are for your community. Are you looking at creating things together? Are you looking at inviting feedback on things? Or are you going to have multiple of these modes at play because you're going to go through various cycles of iteration? And make sure that your programming and the content that you're creating is basically aligning with the modes that you need to reach your goals. So that said, there was that mode, the meta mode, the champion mode along the bottom of the diagram. And this is all about supporting the emergent leaders from within your community. So where you've got folks who want to step up and really help advance the mission of the community, then we think about them as acting as champions. And champions can deploy any one of these other modes. So they might kind of step up and convene a working group. And so they might be supporting collaboration between members of that working group. They might then be sending out emails to summarize what happened in the working group. And so they're using the convey consume mode. But really they're helping to supplement the activities of a community convener or community manager by kind of stepping up into these emergent leadership roles. So we tend to characterize, this is all in our second guidebook on the community participation model, we tend to characterize the roles of champions as three broad categories. So champions can help to maintain a community. So they support the day-to-day running, maybe they serve on a welcome committee or a code of conduct committee to maintain community health. Or they can help to grow the community. So maybe they're spreading the word about the resources the community has produced, or they're bringing in members of their own networks to join the community. Or they can help to evolve the community. So really helping to steer the direction. So serving on a steering committee or a task force, or participating in some of these sort of long-term focus groups to help move into an emerging area of interest, for example. And so champions can either be informal, so they don't have a particular title, you don't as a community manager confer any title to them, but they just kind of step up and kind of help out with some of these functions. Or they can have a more formal role, in which case they might have a particular title, or they can be part of a champions program. And confusingly, they can be called champions, they can be called ambassadors, as we heard for NMDC. Sometimes they can be called fellows as well. So we don't mind what they're called, but if you're creating a specific program to empower them, then we tend to think of that as being a champions program. And so in this second guidebook that I'm referring to, that's referenced here and in the virtual notes, you can see that community champions really bring three impacts to a community. So they add capacity. So they stop the community manager from trying to do all the things and be in all places at once, because champions are able to run the working groups or go out into their kind of home institutions and help to advance the mission of the community. Champions can also bring legitimacy, right? They may have their own professional networks, their own context-specific knowledge that can help to, again, really advance the mission of the community. And they can also extend the reach of the community. So it may be that they operate in particular areas that the community doesn't yet have reach into. That could be things like translating materials into a foreign language or translating materials into an adjacent domain. And so you can think about different ways in which you could support these emergent leaders and really kind of moving forward the activities that you want to do. And then, as our second guidebook describes, there's kind of 9 steps. If you're thinking about, wow, how can I build out a program to support these champions and really ensure they're maximally effective? You know, there's 9 different steps that we've been discussing with our Community Champions Working Group. And by the end of the year, you can expect to see 4 tip sheets, one on each of the first 4 phases in this sort of stepwise progression. And then at the beginning of next year, the first quarter of next year, we're going to publish the remaining 5 of those tip sheets. So if you're starting to plan out what such a program would look like, then we invite you to check out those. They'll also be free to download. Okay, and then just to point you to a few more resources if you'd like to explore this in more detail, because this is just a very quick primer today. The community participation model as a whole is described in our first guidebook, which is also linked from the virtual notes. Delving deeper into community champions and how you support emergent leaders is in the second part of our community participation model guidebook. And then you might have heard me say the word scaffolding. That's all about how we provide the supporting programming and infrastructure to help members move between the modes. We're going to be writing that up for the third and final section of the community participation model series to be released probably early next year. So thank you very much for your attention. Feel free to check out our resources. These again are linked from the virtual notes docs. And yeah, I'll hand over now to our speakers who are actually going to walk us through their own communities, how they apply to the model and how they're working with champions.
Thanks so much, Lou. Up first, we have Alycia Crall. Do you want to share your screen?
Yep, give me just a second. Is everyone seeing my presentation? Okay, great. So yeah, I am Alycia Crall. I am the Director of Community for the Carpentries, and I'm going to be talking about our community today and Champions program specifically. But the Carpentries is a non-profit organization that trains people in software development and data science skills to help support their work and also their career development. We find a lot of people come to our organization for professional development around learning those skills, but we also help support building community and local capacity for teaching and learning these skills as well in different perspectives. Some numbers related to our organization since we started in 2012 up until the end of 2020. So last year, we've run 2,700 workshops in 71 countries. We've trained 2,800 volunteer instructors who have delivered 45 collaboratively developed open lessons to 66,000 novice learners at our 98 member sites. So as this shows, we have a pretty large global community that takes advantage of the resources that are developed by its members. So I wanted to give you a very broad overview of the types of members that are within our community. So first we have our workshop instructors, so the individuals that are teaching and organizing the workshops to teach these skills to our learners. So we have about 2,750 of those, again, around the world. They have online discussions, they meet up locally, and then they also do a lot to support our events. So Carpentry Con is our biannual conference, and we also have Carpentry Connect events, so we're more for local or regional communities. But they bring good teaching practices and domain knowledge to our other community members. We then have trainers. So we have instructor trainers. So they actually train the instructors how to teach our learners. We have about 79 of them internationally, and they meet monthly or bi-weekly to discuss good teaching practices, especially focused, especially as we transitioned during the pandemic from entirely in-person workshops to online workshops, helping prepare our instructors for teaching in those online formats. We have lesson developers, so all of our workshops use the lessons that have been co-created by members of our community. So these individuals specifically focus on creating these lessons, and they utilize some infrastructure that we provide that we call the Carpentries Incubator. But we have a little over 100 of these lesson developers, again, globally. They currently do not meet on a regular basis, but they do a lot of their collaboration and work within GitHub repositories, which is where our lessons live. We also have our lesson maintainers that upkeep and help support all of the lessons that have been developed by the community. This just makes sure they stay up to date and remain relevant. We have about 118 of them around the world, and they meet monthly and do a lot of their work in GitHub repositories, because that's where our lessons live. But they tend to also have a lot of knowledge within specific domains that are focused on our lessons. So, for example, we have specialized lessons in fields such as ecology, genomics, and other areas as well. That's a very high level information about some of our different community members, but the CSCCE, as we mentioned earlier, has developed community profiles, and they actually developed one for the Carpentries community. So she provided a link to our community profile in the notes document. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more about who the Carpentries are and how our community is structured, you can look at that resource that they pulled together. So to provide a little bit more information in the context of Lou's presentation and how our different community members kind of fall along this community participation model, and thinking about the different modes of engagement of each of these members. As I mentioned before, the workshops that are led by the Carpentries instructors all over the globe are given to our community of learners. So we have thousands and thousands of learners, and very much feel that they're falling within this convey, consume, transmissive mode because they're just actively participating in the workshops that are being led by our instructors. The instructors, trainers, and maintainers are kind of falling somewhere within that contribute and collaborate mode. They're primarily contributing once they're trained to serve in the roles that they serve within the community. They then are primarily just providing those workshops and training and resources to our learners and other members of our community. But there's also a lot of space when they have those monthly meetings or meetups at other events where they do a lot of collaboration to determine how to improve on their approaches to the role that they serve in the community. And then with the lesson developers, and we have task force and committees that are put together to help address specific challenges within our community. They kind of fall a little bit more in that collaborate and co-create space. So we had a community champions program that was set up in 2018, and the purpose of it was to support growth of existing communities and attract new communities to support our mission. The program actually became inactive in 2019. It wasn't because it was not successful or any issues or challenges with that, but we had transition in staff within our organization, and the individual that was leading and supporting the program had left the organization at that time. But we're currently looking at reviving our Champions program. One of the reasons for doing this is that as a large global community, over time, we have seen a lot of sub-communities emerge. So we have a sub-community in South Africa, for example. We have a sub-community for Australia, one in New Zealand, and so different areas of the world. And we're looking at using these community champions to help support the development of new sub-communities as they are emerging. So taking in lessons from all the ones that are already out there and that already exist, and taking what we've learned from how they first came together, but also how they have been sustained over time to think about how we want to support them moving forward. So we're right now doing interviews with various community leaders to identify exactly how this program is going to be structured and moving it forward. And so thinking about how it fits within the functions of the community champions that Lou described, we're definitely going to be using this new program to help grow our sub-communities internationally as we're growing as an organization, but also helping the ones that are currently exist, helping them evolve and kind of transition maybe the way that they're doing things to more align how all of these different sub-communities are operating across the regions. So I will stop with that and hand it over to the next person. Thank you.
You can see me, but you can't hear me. Can you see me okay and hear me okay? Great. So my name is Zoe, and I'm a communications manager at Sage Bionetworks in Seattle, Washington. And Sage is a nonprofit research institution based in Seattle with the mission to accelerate biomedical discoveries by improving methods for scientific collaboration and communication. And specifically, I work to facilitate the sharing of open access data and analytical tools in Alzheimer's disease research. The program that I work with is called Accelerating Medicine's Partnership in Alzheimer's Disease. And it has the goal to shorten the time between the discovery of potential drug targets and the development of new drugs for Alzheimer's disease treatment and prevention, as well as integrating analyses of large-scale molecular data from human brain samples with network modeling approaches and experimental validation. AMP-AD is a public-private partnership with funding from the NIA and several pharma and nonprofit organizations. And that was a broad overview. Like Alycia, we have a community profile, and you can check that out. I think the link is in the notes. So AMP-AD is one of several programs that contribute data to the AD Knowledge Portal. AMP-AD is down here, and AMP-AD contributes alongside all these other programs to the AD Knowledge Portal here in the center. And that is a platform for sharing data, analyses, and tools that are generated by the NIA's translational research programs. And so data contributors from all of these programs have agreed to share early stage research without competing for intellectual property. So the portal hosting all this multi-omics data from hundreds of researchers from lots of different institutions across the US and abroad. It's supported not only by those data contributors that you see in the lower right, but also by partners from government, industry, and nonprofit organizations. And these teams come together formally in working groups that focus on specific data analysis questions. So that might be multi-scale analysis or experimental validation. And the purpose of these working groups is really to generate collaborative manuscripts and validate specific scientific questions through multimodal research output. And the portal aims to rapidly and broadly distribute this complex biological data that has been contributed. So on the other side of that, we see these hundreds of external data users, and that's kind of where the magic happens. That's the secondary data use, and that's how the AD Knowledge Portal enables Alzheimer's disease research to take place on a much larger and more equitable scale. So now that we kind of have that structure in place, let's dive into how those resources are distributed to the broader research community. We see the resources listed on the right, and then in bold, you can see these different methods of driving researchers to those data. And so each of these represents a carefully curated and regularly maintained communication channel that can be leveraged to enhance engagement throughout the scientific community. So as I mentioned, working groups, really big. They bring kind of this interdisciplinary approach to address specific questions. We have data release updates and newsletters that let the community know when new data is available, as well as relevant news and information that's targeted to the specific audience that might frequent the portal. We also facilitate quarterly webinars to offer an opportunity for investigators to share in depth their work and to answer questions from the community. News coverage and social media that always helps to push the message just a little bit further to bring in people who may not otherwise leverage the data or know even that the tools exist. And finally, conferences and events. Those can be a big source of data users and even further downstream data contributors. As many of you know, the impact of a virtual conference is not nearly as significant as a face-to-face conference, but the pivot has really gotten easier with practice. So moving on, superimposing community engagement onto that kind of CSCCE model in the context of Lou's introduction, we see there's lots of different ways for both members and champions to engage, and those span the entire spectrum from the convey consume mode all the way to co-create. And I'll just draw your attention to a few of those that might be more versatile and maybe applicable to your community. Attendance for the quarterly webinars does fall under the one-to-many category, but they can really be incredibly influential in terms of just boosting the numbers of data access requests that we receive, as well as direct data downloads further downstream. So that has been a huge success for us. And then moving along, the contribute mode is most straightforwardly the basic data contribution, as people are required to do it through their programs and grants, and that's really helpful, but does fall under the contribute kind of mode of engagement. And then working groups and discussion forums, those are examples of collaborate within our community. And finally, I have a banging partner outside, apologies. Finally, the co-creation of something new that happens with a lot of co-authored data manuscripts and workshops or presentations or workshops at symposia, and zooming in on those champions. Formally or informally, I will mention that the AD Knowledge Portal does not yet have a formal champions program. We hope to, but there are some potential roles for those champions that may be listed here. And these are the people that act in all three ways to kind of maintain and grow and evolve the community. They're active community members. They're the ones who, of course, contribute data, but also amplify the reach of a message or offer to lead a novel collaboration. And with that, I'd like to thank the wonderful people at Sage, without whom none of this would have happened. And I will stop sharing and pass it to the next presenter.
Thank you, Zoe. Just want to start off by saying hello to everyone. My name is Claire Sturm, and I'm the Deputy Director with the Incubator at the Science Gateways Community Institute. You might be wondering what a Science Gateway is. A Science Gateway is a portal that brings together expensive resources like HPC to audiences that are wanting to interact with those resources with their research codes. So bringing this all together, you have gateways like NMDC. We also have, I saw Dave Clemens on the call, and he also has a portal with Galaxy. So these are just a couple of examples of what is a science gateway. And the driver for SGCI is really to provide education and training, networking and community, and support for building and running gateways. One of the things I wanted to highlight in this conversation today is our networking and community. We have several opportunities with our conference and education and training workshops that provide a space for communities using Science Gateway portals or trying to build a new portal to come together, share information, and have a conversation around the challenges of that maintenance and sustainability. Since the start of SGCI, we've been around for 5 years, funded by NSF, and we've had some real growth within the Science Gateways community. So we've had over 3,000 attendees at our events throughout the last 5 years. We've also had impact in the underrepresented communities, especially with MSIs, being able to provide them workforce development and opportunities to do internships with existing gateways. Along with that, we've been able to provide consultations. So this can be on the lens of sustainability training, usability training, or cybersecurity training. We also can provide developers that have expertise in building Science Gateways portals time to actually allocate and support a gateway that is trying to remodel themselves or start afresh with a new project. So these are just a few numbers, but really, again, that point of reference for us is, as a community, we've been able to come around pretty quickly in a very specific space with Science Gateways and open up that opportunity to have a conversation around what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve, and how they can move forward as a community. We see ourselves in this co-create space. We've been able to apply personnel time to really rapidly grow out a couple of areas, one being our Gateway Ambassador space, where we have ambassadors that are coming from campuses, being able to learn from SGCI originally, but now after several years of discussion, being able to disseminate and volunteer as a part of the Science Gateways community to help with the organization of our conference and the planning for additional workshops. So through the Gateway Ambassador program, we're really pulling together this network of campus representatives to share this information, educate faculty and other people on campus about the concepts of gateways, and point interested individuals towards services and resources available at SGCI and the partners and existing gateways that are a part of this community. So with that, this pulls us into a space of about 29 active ambassadors at the moment, and some of them are coming from only science background, and additionally we have others that are very tech savvy, so they are able to make recommendations on what existing platforms the potential researcher could explore if they're trying to build a new science gateway. We've also had this community pull together 13 publications since May 2019, when we really started tracking the activity of this ambassador program. And that's been really impactful to see, because this enables us to witness this unique group coming together and really being able to illustrate their impact on campus and also with the research projects that they're a part of. And with that, that puts us in more of this involved space for the actual ambassadors program. So we are doing less of the organization, the steering, if you will, of this community. They were the ones that initiated the creation of a lot of these publications and continuing to carry on the conversation on their campuses and together, as we're no longer supporting them financially as we initially did when we started this engagement. So it's a really exciting opportunity to still see that traction. So with that, that is my set of slides, and looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Thanks to all of the presenters. So before we head into the panel discussion, I'm just going to do a really quick Zoom poll here just to get a sense of how familiar folks are with these kinds of programs. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that. So of course, number one, have you heard of a Champions program? It doesn't have to be formal. It could be something that sounds like what was presented. And then might you also be a champion, whether it's formally or more informally. Maybe you're advocating for something within a community, and you know, you may not necessarily be in a formal program, but that counts too. All right, looks like everyone participated. And can you guys see the answers? Sorry. Okay, I don't actually, sorry, oh, here we go. It's my first time doing a Zoom poll. So it looks like quite 80% have heard of a Champions program, great. And we were kind of split, yes and no, in terms of champions, and then you're not sure. So hopefully after today, you'll walk away definitely having heard of Champions programs, but then also being a little motivated to participate in one. Thanks a bunch. All right, so let's just go straight into our panel discussion. We encourage you to, this is a small group, so definitely feel free to turn on your video if you feel comfortable. You can, either raise your hand or put something into the chat if you prefer, and also into the shared notes doc if you prefer to. We encourage this to be kind of a very casual, candid conversation. We do have a couple of charged questions, but of course, we'd rather hear from you all. So feel free to type anything in, and we'll have Marissa bug me if I don't see it. So the first question I have for our speakers is, let's see here. Can you describe the community champions in your community? What problems and challenges are they helping to address? And if you could provide some examples of that in terms of how they add value.
I can go. As I mentioned during my presentation, we had a formal champions program that ended in 2019. But when it was initially established, it was specifically meant to help support the leaders of all these various sub-communities that were kind of organically emerging since the Carpentries was established as an organization in 2012. It's grown pretty rapidly. And so all of those different sub-community leaders were needing to kind of have a way of supporting each other and sharing best practices with each other. And a few resources came out of the work that group did before the program ended. But it's one of the reasons we're currently working on getting it relaunched so that we can continue to support the sub-communities that exist, but also have a roadmap for the sub-communities that are starting to emerge. But one of the main values of the program, I would say, is that our organization does a lot, as I mentioned, with all of those numbers, but we actually only have about 15 core staff members. Not all of those 15 are full-time employees. So the champions really, or the sub-community leaders have really been helping support us run Carpentries style activities, workshops within their local region. So that's just been extremely valuable. But they also help recruit new members. They're leading monthly community calls for their sub-communities that are related to the specific needs of their region. So all of that has been really, really important.
Thanks, Alycia. Any others want to chime in?
Sure, happy to jump in. So from our community champions, it did start out as more of a formal process because we were really vetting our ambassadors to even help fund them with their own promotion of their Science Gateway as an incentive to really be a part of the program itself and spread awareness around Science Gateways. Since then, it's become an informal process, really being able to enable that process to grow that way has really showed the value of volunteer hours. And that's something that we truly appreciate from the community as a whole, because they care about what is a Science Gateway and getting that information out as an opportunity for researchers to take their projects to a new scale. It also enables us to understand problems that the champions, our ambassadors, are facing, and enable us to think, how can we fit ourselves as SGCI, as thought leaders here, to help navigate those challenges. Some of those things that have been brought up have been metric collecting. How do you prove the impact of a community, especially around research? So being able to bring that up the chain into the table, and that enables us to really think more strategically as a community as we move forward.
I would definitely echo what Claire said in terms of the challenges of collecting metrics and engagement, and how do you prove the scientific impact of something when, like oftentimes things are quantified in terms of publications or data downloads, and that's wonderful, but how is that meaningful? Is it important when we get another Twitter follower? Like, how do you capture the significance of that? One thing that our champions or informal champions have helped us to do is kind of identify and leverage the existing resources. So there's existing assets. And so to kind of find what they are, capture them, and then leverage those existing communications channels, those existing champions, those people that are already advocating, and just provide them even more scaffolding so they can take what they're doing and extend it further into the research.
Thanks so much for your insights. Yeah, I think I totally agree with all that's been said. And also within NMDC, I think, it truly is a way for us to connect with the community. I think sometimes we have a lot of creative ideas and ways in which we want to kind of carry out some of our development, but through our ambassadors, we're able to kind of see and be at the front line of understanding where those communities are, and so that we can meet them where they're at. So that's been really critical for us. And Claire, sorry if you already mentioned this, but just in case it's not, I'll ask it. Is there an example, like I know because you have more of a more established ambassador program, an example where you can describe an activity where it's related to your mission, where you couldn't have done it without your ambassador program?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up question. So one of the more obvious opportunities that did come out that's coming to my mind has been one of our past conferences. So for one of the past Gateways conference, we actually had the ambassadors program put in a publication in order to run a tutorial around community building. And this was something that we didn't ask, it was what they found to be important from their conversations. And it's led to several follow-up submissions at other conference settings, which really has enabled that space around, people care around the time we spend to grow and establish communities. So there's definitely a tension there. And it was also a really rewarding opportunity to sit in, listen to, again, challenges, questions that they were having. And it enables us to really think strategically. So that brings us back to our mission of supporting science gateways. So having that organic opportunity populate itself really enabled us to sit back in the seats instead of, always dictating of what we think the challenge is from our experience working with different gateway platforms in the past. Being able to actually be a part of the crowd and listen in was really special.
That's a really great example. That's sort of the dream, right, of where we're all hoping to go. So that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. In terms of more community-driven work, I guess, can you all mention a little bit or speak to how engagement activities are prioritized within your organizations? Are they determined internally, or is it driven from the community, for example?
My first response is money. Wherever the money is and whatever is stipulated in the grant is where the effort goes. But I guess more kind of optimistically speaking, it would be what is valued within the community. And so we've done surveys where we'll go out into the community and actually ask the people, both data users and data contributors, what is it that makes this tool instrumental for you, and what are the pain points, and identifying those and then kind of jumping off from there. Again, oftentimes you're limited by the resources that you have, but knowing what people want, I think, is a really great place to start.
Yeah, a lot of our activities are driven by our members. So for example, we have community discussions that are set up each quarter. So we provide the infrastructure for community members to schedule community calls around themes that they're interested in. So we onboard discussion host leaders. So they'll actually lead the calls on topics that are of interest to them and their sub-communities. And we just provide a lot of the infrastructure support for those types of activities, but we also provide communications infrastructure. So we have a Carpentries workspace for the entire community, but then we have channels that are set up for all of those different sub-communities so they can support each other. And then we also have mailing listservs that are set up in the infrastructure platform that we have available, and provide support to help support communications for that as well. So most of our activities are primarily led by the community currently, but staff will also support activities where they bring specific expertise. And mostly those are provided as professional development opportunities for our volunteers.
Great, thanks for sharing that insight. I see that we have a couple of our own ambassadors here today. So just to lift the hood on that a little bit, I think, for the NMDC ambassador program, it was definitely driven by the community. We had a workshop 2 years ago now focused on metadata standards. And one of the main things that came out of that workshop, which was with, the broader community, was that there just really needed to be more training for metadata standards, and that the research community didn't have the proper tools for that. So we had, put out a publication as part of that workshop and came out with a couple of recommendations. And so that's really what drove some of the goals and aims for our ambassador program, which is to really go out there and promote the use of data standards, but to also gather feedback on how do we do a better job on training. So in case you weren't aware. So this next question might be more appropriate for Lou, or others feel free to join. Not all organizations might be ready to support champions. Is there a right time to start a champions program, and what might that look like?
Yeah, so there's a couple of considerations here. So we didn't really sort of discuss this in the introduction, but running a champions program is actually quite an investment of a community manager's time. One of the ways that I often refer to this is in the day-to-day running of a community manager is often working kind of horizontally. They're doing the things like organizing the whole community events, so the community calls, the monthly newsletter, the blog posts, and so on, and actually running a whole nother program to sort of reach down and empower kind of vertically those emergent leaders to kind of rise up and help run the community is almost another whole job. And so I think, first of all, we've got to think very carefully about the resourcing and the support that's needed. How ambitious, how complex is your champions program going to be, and can you really support that so that you're making it as easy as possible for champions to be effective? Are you thinking about what onboarding pathways look like, and all the other things in that 9-step framework that I showed you, the evaluation, the check-ins, the offboarding, so that you don't lose all that fantastic community knowledge that the champions have acquired while they've been serving in their champions roles. The second thing to consider kind of relates a bit more to like where your community is at in terms of its stage of growth, its stage of evolution. So, we intentionally call these emergent leaders, and what might happen at the very, very beginning of your community is that you've not quite fully aligned around what the community's purpose is for. So there's some general sort of interest in a topic or solving a problem or doing a thing together, but there's not fully ended up with that kind of resonance about, yeah, this is the direction we want to go in for now or for the next 18 months. And until you've really got that resonance, you may not be able to identify folks who are then kind of stepping up and saying, oh, I want to run a working group on that. Oh, I want to take that on and spread the word and bring other folks into the community. And so, as always, as a community manager, you're balancing between trying to kind of look into your fuzzy crystal ball and predict the future and predict when the right time is going to be, and be responsive to what is actually in front of you and what is needed. So you want to be kind of one step ahead of things and have the foundations of a program ready so that when those emergent leaders are ready to kind of step up to the call and take on those roles, you can really accurately, helpfully support them. But you don't want to get too ahead of things, otherwise you're not necessarily going to be able to find folks who are willing and ready to be able to serve in those positions. Yeah.
Yeah, that resonates with me so much because, the NMDC is quite new, only a few years old. And so we were certainly in that phase for a while of what is our purpose, what in terms of our community and defining who they are and how they want to be involved. So thanks for that. Do any others want to chime in on that topic?
Sure. I'll also share one of the things that we started noting when we were getting ready to initiate a champions program was really setting up that future leadership, because we knew that the grant is going to end at a certain point. So there is that timeline around the monetary expense, but also how do we get the emerging leaders ready and engaged and bought into, really servicing the community as a whole and wanting to champion ready enough. So when it is time for us to evolve to the next stage, they're there to step in. And we've really seen this with our conference, being able to establish our conference as a continuing opportunity outside of the grant cycle. So being able to see our champions step in as committee members on our conference and even leads to drive how can we retain funding, how can we make this very similar to another project that is funded by NSF, Exceed. They had the conference perk underneath the Exceed umbrella, and then over the last couple of years it's been adopted by ACM as a primary driver, but completely run by a committee in order to move the conference forward. So taking that model is really when we said we want to do something similar, but we don't want it always to be the SGCI leadership show. We want it to be the community because it's meant to be the community's conference. So that's when we had that overarching goal really drive the timeline for the Champions program.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Claire. I just got a ping about the time we have left. So thanks so much for all of your answers and discussion. I think I have one final poll for you all, sorry. This is really actually focused about incentives and rewards, and I wanted to ask the question, but we're out of the time. So instead I'll pose it all to you. Let me just launch this really quickly. So, we kind of want to understand, where you are in terms of your career, and then what sort of incentives and rewards would encourage you. It doesn't necessarily have to be within the research community, but whatever community that is important to you and that you work in. So if you don't mind filling out the poll really quick.
Does very cool swag count?
I forgot to put that in there. Maybe that counts as special access to resources. Not really. Awesome. Let me just share the results really quick. All right. So it looks like we have a bit of a spread in terms of career stage and career development opportunities. Definitely passionate about the mission or cause is number one. So yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, everyone. The last thing I wanted to just share is, let me just share my screen really quick here. Again, just links out to resources on the NMDC. Oops, is that coming through? Okay. So please check out our GitHub if you're interested in learning more about us, as well as our website. And we have a couple of publications out. And then just a quick little promo for our next community conversation, which is going to take place on January 12th of next year. But this will be focused more on our bioinformatic workflows. And so please mark your calendar and join for that. But other than that, I think that we might have a really quick 10-second, I'm going to just do a quick 10-second go around. If our panelists and speakers want to do just one final thought before our attendees leave today. Let's start with Lou.
Yeah, so I always caveat this community management role with don't try and do everything all at once. So if you're thinking about building community, creating opportunities for champions, scale your expectations, go step by step, don't try and get to the final goal in one leap.
Thanks, Lou. Alycia.
Yeah, I should say, especially with us kind of putting everything in the context of what the CSCCE does, there are a lot of us that are building champions programs, and that's been a really great resource to find others that are doing this type of work, getting tips, sharing knowledge with each other. So highly recommend if you are thinking about building one of these programs to check out that community of practice.
Awesome. Zoe?
ABCD, asset-based community development.
Awesome. Okay. Claire.
Hard to follow that one, but like others have said, really just utilizing existing resources and not being afraid to ask questions.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us today, to our speakers. Really appreciate you all. And thanks to our attendees for joining us today too. Hope to see you next month. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.